Rina Tifine and I head media and comms at Khoj. But I've also had the privilege of working on the World Weather Network project for about a year and a half now, along with my colleagues, with some incredible artists. Before I introduce the artists present here today, none of whom really require any introduction, I'd like to speak a little bit about Khoj and our work at the intersection of art and ecology, and our work is part of the World Weather Network. Khoj is a not-for-profit contemporary arts organization working towards expanding the limits of what constitutes art. Since its inception in 1997, Khoj has relentlessly worked to support experimental creative practices at the intersection of art and other disciplines, including art and science. And the Mali River networks. Um, in, in April 2022, we invited artists Atul Balla, Mitu Sen, Raqs Media Collective, and Karachi La Jamia to traverse, both metaphorically and physically, the parallel and areas close to it and share with us their experiences of weather in these areas in the form of weather reports, which is what you see displayed as part of the exhibition 28th and North Parallel Weathers downstairs and around Khoj. Three of the artists from the Khoj's weather station are present with us today. Join me in welcoming Shuddha from Raqs, Shahana Rajani and Zara Malkani from Karachi La Jamia. Here's a little bit about them before we go into their presentation. Raqs Media Collective was founded in 1992 by Monica, Jibesh, should I say the full names? Yeah. Monica Narula, Jibesh Bakshi, and Shudabrata Sengupta. The word Raqs in several languages denotes an intensification of awareness and presence attained by whirling, turning, being in a state of revolution. Raqs takes this sense to mean kinetic contemplation and a restless and energetic entanglement with the world and with time. Raqs practices across several media, making installation, sculpture, video, performance, text, lexica, and curation. Their work finds them at the intersection of contemporary art, philosophical speculation, and historical inquiry. Karachi La Jamia was founded in 2015 by artists Shahana Rajani and Zara Malkani as a nomadic space moving outside the institution to collectively explore new radical pedagogies and art practices. Since 2015, they have facilitated a series of site-specific courses and collaborative research projects to explore the intersections of militarism, land accumulation, climate crisis, indigenous disposition, and knowledge production in Karachi. We will begin with a round of presentations by the artists, and this will be followed by an open discussion between the artists and the audience. We'll try and we've started late, so we'll try and wrap up by 7:30, 7:40. So that it gives us enough time to grab a beer and do game night post this. Thank you once again, and yeah, there are three games today that we're playing. One is Wingspan, the other is called Sabha. It's by Justice Adda. It's a game that's all about how does a bill become ordinance and then law. And the other one is a collection of web-based games which you will get to later. Over to you, Shahana and Zara. Just give us a second to check the sound, but can you speak to us?
Hi, can you hear?
No.
No.
Just hold on a second.
What are you using? This is Zoom.
Where are my technical? All the sound people in our. We have many sound engineers here. Suresh, let Gautam help. Maybe we start with Shraddha? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
अभी हो जाएगा.
I think if you choose the Sony TV, it should work. The output is not selected as a Sony TV. If that's the TV you're looking.
yeah.
Just try now.
Now say some. Can you say something now?
Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so should we get started then?
Yes. That's good.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Zara and this is Shahana, and we have our collaborative project Karachi La Jamia. It's really nice to virtually cross the border. We're going to try to keep it short, but we figured that maybe it would be good to have an introduction to our practice in general and our overall work. So I'm just going to share my screen for a little presentation. Oh, it says host disabled screen sharing.
Alina?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Try now.
Oh, it's good, it's working. Shana, do you want to say a little bit, or should I start? How would you want? I think you can start. I'll join in. Okay. So we are Karachi La Jamia. Shana and I have been working together on Karachi La Jamia since 2015. Karachi La Jamia is what we call a pedagogical experiment. And over the years, since 2015, we've carried out a number of courses that take place in public space in Karachi, and all of our courses are in collaboration with an ongoing movement or an activist organization in the city. And we'll get a little bit more into the specificities of the courses and also the work that then went into the World Weather Network. But I'll give a little bit of a background of how we started. So one of the first projects that Shahana and I worked on together was Exhausted Geographies, which we started working on in 2013. And this was a research and publication project that led to or eventually produced a series of 7 maps and 7 essays about Karachi. And what our motivation with Exhausted Geographies, what we were setting out to do at the time, was really to address, to engage with, and think through the ways in which in 2013 Karachi was very much being seen and cast in local and international media as a very, very dangerous city. kind of a central node in the global war on terror, and was being, across different forms of cultural production, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's art, whether it's books, novels, fiction, nonfiction. Karachi was repeatedly being cast as the most dangerous city in the world, as Times Magazine's cover put it. And this was a period of time in 2013 that Shahana and I both had moved back to Karachi after being away for a while. And we were really trying to think through both other ways of thinking about and representing and researching and being in Karachi and being together in Karachi. But also we were trying to think about and look at and explore the ways in which this visual representation, or the ways in which visual media is mobilized in order to represent Karachi as such. And so in doing that, we were really looking at the role of maps, and we were looking at the ways in which maps had been mobilized by mainstream media to represent Karachi as in order to create an atmosphere of fear in Karachi, and to build support and consensus for what eventually became a military operation in Karachi in 2015. And it's in the context of that military operation that Karachi La Jamia emerged as an idea and then a practice between Shahana and I. Shahana, do you want to take it from there?
When we started this project, me and Zara were both teaching at universities at that time, and we were both becoming really alarmed by the growing militarization of the city at large through the Karachi operation, but also we were really viscerally and palpably feeling how this militarization was manifesting within our own spaces, within the university, and cultural and art spaces. So, we were experiencing at this time, censorship and surveillance had really drastically increased. We were seeing our city become enclosed and securitized. Spaces for cultural spaces for dissent were vanishing. Progressive community centers were being forced to shut down. Activist leaders, organizers were being killed and silenced. So this was a moment in which we were both becoming really aware and experiencing acute repression in the city. And Karachi La Jamia means anti-university. And so we really started this project both as university teachers to find a space where we could move outside of the institution and where we could continue doing the kind of political work that we wanted to. And it's really through this project that we have been trying to both imagine pedagogical and cultural practices that can connect with ongoing struggles in Karachi, to build solidarity, and also really to resist the ongoing enclosures of land and knowledge. Through this project, we've really been trying to find ways of practicing care and connection across what has become even more so since 2015 an increasingly bordered and fragmented city. And we've been kind of experimenting with what it means to reimagine study not as an extractive process of creating and maintaining distance, but to see study as a form of sociality and relation. I think so much of the learning that's generated in universities and institutional spaces really functions to demystify, to fix, to reduce this expansive and what we have found mystical and critical practice of pedagogy. Of course, this draws on a long colonial legacy of depoliticizing education and knowledge that goes back to centuries. And I think the work that me and Zara set out to do with Karachi La Jamia is to try to learn, to witness, to connect in defiance of the boundaries that are demarcated for us by the state and its institutions, and to really try to create spaces, relationships, communities in which we may build, recognize, and honor both our relationships and entanglements with each other, with the city, and the land that we inhabit.
So besides the courses that we've organized, we also, as Karachi La Jamia, do research that looks into and investigates the way in which our universities have increasingly been militarized and surveilled, but also the ways in which our universities, and more specifically art schools, are being mobilized in service of the escalating militarization of the Pakistani state. Um, we'll just give a small one of our first courses. We'll just speak a little bit about one of our first courses before we talk about the World Weather Network. One of our first courses was called the Gadap Sessions, which we organized in collaboration with the Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance, and it took place in a neighborhood called Gadap. And that neighborhood was in the process of being occupied, and the communities that lived in that neighborhood were being displaced and dispossessed for the purposes of building a real estate mega development project called Bahria Dam. And so in the Gadap sessions, we spent 6 months in the neighborhood of Gadap. Every Saturday, we went there with a group of students or participants, and we undertook different modes of research and study and documentation. So on the one hand, we were documenting the ongoing violence that was happening in the place and the ongoing processes and architectures of occupation that were happening, but we were also at the same time looking at the long indigenous history and ecological history of that region and the ecological knowledges that were that were held by the local community there. So we used different kind of modalities, from documentation to walks to interviews, oral historiography, working with lawyers, working with architects, working with locals, working with the activist organization Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance. We also did mapping in collaboration with the Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance to trace and to keep track of the ongoing occupation that was happening. And with Karachi La Jamia, we don't necessarily always, our courses don't always lead to any cultural production. The work in Karachi La Jamia is the pedagogy and the course itself. So our courses don't always lead to us creating artwork that then circulates in the larger world, but sometimes it does. So in the case of Gadap Sessions, one of the things that we did come up with was a short film called Jinnah Avenue, in which we explored, by doing research on the main road that was being built by Peria Town, we explored the ways in which development and militarism are intertwined, and the ways in which the military development nexus collaborates to create this infrastructural nationalism in Pakistan. So, Shana, do you want to take? This is our most recent course, Hamare Siyal Rishte, which really kind of fed into the work that we then did for World Weather Network.
So yeah, when Khoj approached us with the World Weather Network, we had already done a series of workshops and courses under the title of Hamare Siyal Rishte, and we had become, with Gadap sessions, we were looking very much at land politics, and during that work, the communities that we were working with really kind of reminded us that land and water are so inseparable. And even though we tend to think of Karachi as this desert landscape, it is really sustained by a rich network of waterways, seasonal waterways, by the sea, of course, by mountains. And so, yeah, this course was really an attempt for us to engage with Karachi's water ecologies. For this course, we collaborated with the Pakistan Fisherfolk Forum and with the Sindh Indigenous Rights Alliance. And it was really kind of centering the sacred coastal and riverine geography of Karachi, and also wanting to learn more about both ongoing and past movements that have happened in defense of the landscape, along with the ancient ecological knowledges that are being fostered alongside it. So yeah, I guess a really important aspect of our project in turning away from the university space and the institution space, we also really turned towards kind of spaces of alternative community activist organizations in Karachi, and that these, and kind of really engaging and archiving and learning about how these alternate movements and organizations have really kept alive a rich history of environmental resistance and refusal. Yeah, so like Zara said, with the rap sessions in this Hamare Syal Rishte, we did a variety of different sessions. We did a session where we went on a boat with with the fisherfolk elder to see the mangroves and to understand Karachi's relationship with the delta. We did one session on at the sea where there is a deep sea port being constructed, to really again think about the violence of infrastructure, but also Karachi's position within the larger Indian Ocean. We did a walk further into the city where the Indigenous Rights Alliance was sharing with us and informing us and teaching us how to sense these seasonal rivers, their names, the meanings behind those names, and how incredibly vital these rivers are to the sustenance of Karachi as a city.
So it was, yeah, I can. So it was really around the time that we were still working on Hamare Syal Rishte when we were approached with the World Weather Network. And very soon after we started working with the World Weather Network, these massive floods happened in Karachi in 2022. And yeah, it was during that period of time that we were also thinking as Karachi La Jamia about how the work that we do in our courses can have a wider reach or circulate in wider ways. And so we wanted to take some of the work that we were doing in Hamare Syal Rishte and share that with larger audiences by creating pedagogical materials in print form or in other media. And so with World Weather Network, against the backdrop of these major floods happening, we thought that this was a good opportunity to do that work, to kind of spread some of the pedagogical work we're doing beyond the very immediate community that we have in Karachi. And one thing that really came up with the floods that happened in 2022, in one of the main province that was impacted by the floods was Sindh. And Sindh has a very long history of anti-dam resistance. Sindh has a very antagonistic relationship, is a province that has a very antagonistic relationship historically with the Pakistani state, and that antagonism really comes about in the context of environmental defense and river defense, and particularly the defense of the river Sindhu or the Indus. And so Sindh has a really, really rich history of resisting infrastructural interventions on the river ecology. And Sindh also has a very, very vast print and publishing world in Sindhi. And so one thing that really came up with the floods was this real sense of the larger world of Pakistan kind of awakening to the violence of infrastructure, because so much of the damage that had been wrought by the floods was the fault lines on which that damage was wrought was incomplete or flawed infrastructural projects like the left bank outfall drain or the right bank outfall drain by the Asian Development Bank. And so one thing that we really wanted to do in that period of time was to participate in and to help circulate this vast body of research and writing that has always existed in defense of the river and water ecologies of Sindh. And so that's something that we set out to do with some of the work that we've done that is being shown in Khoj right now. Another thing that really came up for us around the same period of time was that we wanted to reach out to different audiences. Since Shahana and I had been teaching at universities, the students and the participants in our courses were mostly of that age range or older. And we really wanted to work with younger audiences as well. So we took this as an opportunity to bring some of the research that we had done around river defense, but also river folklore and river historiography to different audiences. So the book that you see over there is part of that. And then we also have Celab Syllabus. And Celab Syllabus was also this attempt to share some of the research that we've been doing, excerpts and extracts from our own writing and research and pedagogical work during that period of time, but also the work that we were referencing. Shana, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it. Alina, do we have more time or should we stop here?
Perhaps now we could, move to Shraddha and have probably Shraddha talk a little bit about Raqs's process with the for world weather, but also, their practice, Raqs's practice overall, and how that's in conversation, because you're also interestingly sharing the same, room, right? You're also showing at the same place. So how does that sort of play out? And then we can open to discussion post that.
Thank you, and thank you both for this wonderful presentation. It's a great privilege to be here. First of all, this is actually the first time that Raqs Media Collective is showing in Khoj, surprise, surprise. But hopefully, but we've had a long relationship over many years, and it's wonderful to be here, as I'm here often, talking to people, but also to be sharing space with Karachi La Jamia. The three of us in Raqs are alumni from Delhi Ka Jamia. So the university that we went to, not the anti-university, is Jamia Millia Islamia. So when you said you're the anti-Jamia, I said, oh, okay, now that's a Sial Rishta. Right? And it's wonderful to share space with you because I think that the projects speak to each other. I'm not doing a presentation because everyone can go and see the work, right? And that should be adequate reason to talk about it. The interesting thing for us is this business of what you call hamare sial rishte, our humid relations. Sial is a very beautiful word because it indexes both a certain kind of fecundity, it indexes a temperature, it indexes a state of condensation. And I think that if artist practices between India and Pakistan, countries that share large river basins and rivers, could be humid and fertile, it would be wonderful. So thank you for sharing our space. The primary way in which we approached this provocation to be a part of the World Weather Network, interestingly, we had invitations from two quarters, one from Khoj to consider the 28th degree north parallel, and another from the Yinka Shonibare Foundation and the Guest Artist Space Foundation in London and Lagos to think about the weather systems in West Africa. And it seemed to us, it made sense to us to create a conversation between these two places. And I remember that when Alina asked us for some references and some notes to give to people, so there's a nice LED display outside Khoj just now which carries little lines of text. And there is one line which for us was a beginning to thinking about the world weather. And it's a line from a poet of the 1930s, and Bengali engineer poet, Jyotindra Mohan Sengupta, no relation of mine, who wrote this beautiful poem called, in which there's a line that says, and you can read it outside, Ek phali megh dhar dite paro, Cherapunji theke gobi shaharar buke, which means something like, can you loan a sliver of cloud from Cherapunji, which is in Meghalaya, the wettest place apparently on earth, or not in India, in South Asia. No longer, used to be. That's a story in itself. But at one time it was, when I was growing up, it was the wettest place on earth. So see, he's asking whether there can be a cloud, a rain cloud, loaned from Cherapunji to the heart of not Sahara, but Gobi Sahara, Gobi in outer Mongolia, Sahara in North Africa. So here is this guy in 1929 or 30 thinking in this planetary way, understanding that weather systems are not local phenomena. Rivers, mountains, weather systems, patterns of हमारे सियाल रिश्ते ये मतलब आलमी चीज़ होती है. It's a worldwide thing. So I think there's a belated realization amongst the artistic cultural world that if we are talking about the world, we're not, and we're talking about the weather, we're not talking about microclimates, we have to talk about the world. And for us, that was an opening and a starting point of a conversation between latitudes and longitudes. We've always liked latitudes and longitudes. The very first major work that we ever made in an art space was called 27 degrees north, 56 degrees east. Coordinates of, no, I'm not saying. But when you said 28 degrees north, we said, acha, 1 degree ka fark hai. Chalega. So we can adjust. And that's why the fascination with longitudes, latitudes as a grid system that helps us to think about planetary phenomena in a planetary tone or in a planetary manner. So that's what made it possible for us to think about 3 rivers. So there's a river at the 28 degree north parallel that bisects the 28 degree north parallel called Tista, which if you see the work, and it begins with this reference to a river called Tista, whose name may have, can't say for certain, may have etymologically derived from the Sanskrit word Trishna or the Farsi Tishnagi, which means thirst. So if there's a river called Thirst, it automatically takes you in a different direction. And then there is another river which gives its name to a large number of people in a large territory called the Indus, which actually is also on the 28 degree north parallel. So when you were talking about flash floods in Pakistan, we are very aware of the fact that control over rivers is an ecological question and also a political question and a military question. So India, the Republic of India, controls the headwaters of the Himalayan river systems both in the east as well as in the west. So because of a peculiar accident of the cartographic arbitrariness of partition, right? Which means that the headwaters of the Indus and the Indus system, the Sapta Sindhu, of which 5 rivers constitute the Punjab, and the Tista, Brahmaputra, Gangetic system in the east, both are controlled at the heads by the Republic, by the Indian Republic. And this is a kind of, it almost has a military dimension because from time to time you will hear Indian politicians say, ki ab tap band kar denge. Right? I mean, I've heard this, the Prime Minister of this country say, ab tap band kar denge. Indus water will no longer flow. It's the one India-Pakistan treaty that has not been violated, thankfully, till this date, which is called the Indus Water Treaty, signed in September 1960 in the city of Karachi by 2 intelligent Indian and Pakistani politicians for once, right? Liaquat Ali Khan and Nehru, they sort of worked this out. Ye hona chahiye. I don't remember if it was Liaquat Ali Khan. Anyway, but the point is that despite 3 wars, India has not yet stopped the water. But when they say that they will stop the water, or when, for instance, the glaciers, and Pakistan is the country with the largest number of glaciers in the world, which is why global warming affects Pakistan in a way that it doesn't affect other countries, because when these glaciers begin melting, you get flash floods in the Indus River Basin, including in Karachi. And control over glaciers, militarized control over glaciers, I was interested to see you talk about the militarization of Karachi, and then if you think about the militarized control over glaciers, such as the Siachen Glacier, which has been the highest military battlefield in the world, is causing Himalayan destabilization. And people think about the fact that there are micro tremors. Why are there more earthquakes in Uttarakhand suddenly? It's because they build highways in places exactly where they should not be built. And the highways are being built not for people like you and me to go on Char Dham Yatra, because that is what they say, but the highways are being built for heavy artillery to move across the mountains. And that causes micro tremors, it causes a cascading seismic chain reaction that then leads to sudden onsets of seismic disturbance, sudden floods, and all of these. But anyway, to come back to Nabam, our work. Nabam, the expression Nabam is taken, we borrow it from the Bengali dialect spoken by fishermen in the Sundarban Delta, who talk about a spot in the Bay of Bengal, which is actually where the Meghna, Brahmaputra, Tista rivers empty into the sea. So you can talk about, you can see where the river forms a delta and it meets the sea. But actually all that river water collects a little further, further into the distance, not so much close to the shore, a little further, because it's a very large volume of water. And that volume of water sinks into the seabed and creates enormous amounts of pressure, and it creates places of great depth. So there is a place, there is a spot close to the deltaic region, the mangrove delta and Sundarbans, called Nabam. And Nabam is called Nabam because in the fishermen's Bengali dialect, bam is a measure, is a bas, which they put down from the boat, and then you have 1 bam, 2 bam, 3 bam, to indicate how deep the water is. And when no bam can reach the bottom, it's Nabam. So it's a measure without measure. And if we think about categories like thirst, like famine, like flood and deluge, they exceed our understanding of what a measure should be. So the extreme weather events that we are increasingly getting used to are now all going across into the reds. So whether it's pollution, it goes into the red zone, which means that no measure can contain it anymore. If it's flood events, it's going across the, Pradeep Saha is sitting in the audience. He knows more about water and sewage in this city than anybody else does. He knows that the flood waters exceed a certain point regularly. And we're getting used to the idea that we can't any longer measure what we used to be able to measure. So that category of measures without measure becomes one way of thinking about the fact that you can't just loan a rain cloud from Cherrapunji with its immense humidity. You can't create a Seal Rishta between the expanding Gobi or the Sahara or the Thar deserts, which is also a kind of frontier between India and Pakistan, and this excess of humidity. So we are living at a time where famines and droughts increase, which means there is less water, and simultaneously there is an excess of water. So both the measurelessness of aridity, of dryness, and the measurelessness of humidity, that is of wetness, seem to be a paradoxical conjoint feature of this time. Now the reason why we are artists, some of us are artists, some of us love art enough to battle the traffic jam without measure and come here and be late and all that. The reason why we do these things is because art allows us to think about things that can't be measured properly. We can still think about that excess of whatever it is that changes the way we relate to each other, to ourselves, that actually defeats the question of measure. And Raqs Media Collective has two obsessions. One is time and the other is measurement. And the third is the measurement of time. So given these three things, it's natural that we should look at the planet as an instrument which tells us how much we can't measure. And this work down there is actually exactly about that. It's also about a river that runs through a sacred grove in West Africa, in the Oshun state. And that river, if you see it, we have these beautiful drone shots, is a liquid, thick brown. It used to be a clear river of which you could see the bottom, so it had a balm. And now it's become Nabam because it's opaque. It's become opaque because of the slurry that comes from gold mining that's just outside the limits of the sacred grove. So normally we think of environmental zones in terms of zones of refuge or protection. यहाँ पे आपने wildlife sanctuary बना दी, यहाँ पे you've created a protected zone, and the ecology is protected. But the earth doesn't operate like that. The earth doesn't operate by saying, here is Bharatpur Wildlife Sanctuary and here is the rest of Rajasthan, right? Obviously, the birds have to fly over the rest of Rajasthan from Siberia to get to Bharatpur. And if the conditions are not conducive to the flight, they will not go to Bharatpur. Similarly, the sacred grove may be a sacred grove, although it is a threatened space. But if downstream and upstream, downstream is oil rigs in the Niger River Delta, upstream is gold mining in Osun State, and if these extractive processes continue in that measureless Nabam way, then even the sacred grove in its sacrality stands threatened. Incidentally, that sacred grove is still somewhat intact because of an artistic intervention. One mad Austrian woman called Susanne Wenger decided that she was a Yoruba elder in 1948-49 after the Second World War, went to West Africa, decided to be initiated into the Yoruba community, and built an artistic practice of creating dimensions and creating icons of Yoruba gods and goddesses who did not have icons before. So suddenly she created a tradition out of the absence of iconicity. And the presence of these icons in the Osun Oshogbo Sacred Grove have turned it into a sacred site. So now people come there because there is an idea that this is a healing place. Nigeria is an intensely religious country. There are Christian evangelical fundamentalists and Islamic fundamentalists who both hate animistic religion, but they end up themselves. Everybody tells me that the evangelical ministers come to the Sacred Grove, they take the sacred water because it has healing properties, and then they heal their people and say, God has given this to me. So this is also another kind of extractive relationship that continues. So between Meghalaya, where the Tista River is, and Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh, the northeastern frontiers of India, Ladakh, the frontier of the disputed territory, former disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir, now just the disputed territory of Ladakh, which has got a line of actual control and a line of control, two dotted lines on either side, which run across the 28-degree parallel, and between the memory of water, again along the 28-degree parallel, because we tend to think of India as this kind of trapezoid, right? But actually it's at an angle. So the 28-degree parallel, believe it or not, runs both through the northeast of India, through Ladakh and through Rajasthan, which is not intuitively what you think of when you see the shape, but it does because of the nature of how the earth curves. So between these three frontier zones, where water as a memory and as an idea is always something that communities have had to think with. So in Rajasthan, the memory of water is what is at stake through step wells. And part of this work includes a set of observations and a dialogue and a conversation on a step well called Abhaneri, which is in not far from Jaipur, which is Abhaneri has also a temple close to it, called a temple to a goddess called Harshad Mata, the goddess of bliss and happiness. And Abhaneri is the glow of the goddess of bliss and happiness. It's one of the most spectacular step wells in western and northern India. So it's protected. You can't do very much. We wanted to fly a drone. We couldn't. But we could fly a drone in a nearby village step well in Pushkar. Pushkar is made up of three villages. There's Budha Pushkar, Old Pushkar, Madhyam Pushkar, and Naya Pushkar. There's a Madhyam Pushkar village which has a beautiful functioning step well, and that is where we construct a conversation around the memory of water, around the future as well as the memory of water. 3 rivers, 2 step wells, and many conversations. And many strange, stray stories populate that work. And they are facing a sky through which an airplane is traveling, taking us around the planet, doing whatever it has to, while we consider what is on the earth, what is under the earth, and what flows through the earth. So strange things happen. Like, for instance, we discover a reading of the Aranyakanda of the Valmiki Ramayana in West Africa. Because when Sita has been abducted and Ram is missing her, he doesn't miss her when she's around, but he misses her a lot when she's not there. When he's missing her, he's talking to the forest and talking to the birds and the leaves and the trees, saying, "Have you seen Sita? Have you seen Sita?" And we must remember that Sita is actually Janaki. She's the earth. Actually, she comes from the earth. And all the trees, the birds, the forest say, "No, we have not seen Sita. We don't know where she is." And that moment is prefigured in the incredibly rich Sanskrit prose of Valmiki Ramayana. Don't read Tulsidas, he's quite banal. Read Valmiki. In the Sanskrit prose of the Valmiki Ramayana, there is an almost apocalyptic vision of what will happen if this forest turns away from life, or if life turns away from the forest, which we thought was incredible. That's how you create a planetary imagination. You look at memories of apocalyptic strains in thought, and then you transpose them to another territory and to another time. And all of this helps you, doesn't give you much by way of, I mean, I know a lot more about rivers than I did before, but that's not the point. The point is that I think we all, by making art and by being in the presence of art and by being part of the Sial Rishte and the fish in the Karachi basins and in the lagoons of Karachi, we change the way we feel about each other and about the planet. And that's something that art can still do. It's a function that we can still hold on to. Knowing the planet, knowing what's happened to clouds and rain and forests is the second step. But without understanding that this is a Sial Rishta, this is a humid relation, we're never going to ask the right questions. That's why I'm grateful to Khoj for persistently provoking artists and art-loving communities in this city to be in the presence of the right questions in this city. Thank you.
Yeah, we can open it up to a discussion if the audience have any questions that
Or indeed, if you have questions of
Yeah.
each
each
other
other, yeah.
to begin with.
I just love the catalog of fishes. Where there's a small catalog of fish. And I think that's fantastic because in Delhi, there are two communities that eat fish. There's the Bengalis and the Assamese, and the Sindhis eat fish. And as a Bengali child growing up in Delhi, we used to get fish from Sindhi fish shops because they are the ones who actually, before the Bengalis got into the act. Sorry, I was just saying that there is a way in which the fish of the Indus River basin have made their way to Delhi because of the fish eating habits of the Sindhi population of Delhi, which is where I grew up as a Bengali child in a Sindhi neighborhood. And we used to get our fish from a Sindhi fish shop. So your catalog of fishes drove me back to that memory. Thank you. Yep.
Maybe I'd like to say, Zara and Shahana, are you continuing with this and what are your next steps? I mean, because, projects carry on. We were very lucky to have caught you midstream, to use the terminology that is being spoken. But I'm just wondering where it will go and how people are responding to it. If your students, your participants, where have others taken this on? Is this continuing? How the communities you worked with, what has it meant for them? Just a little more would be really interesting to know.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Shani, do you want to go? Okay. Yeah, I think we really, both the Salam syllabus and the children's book, I think we're thinking of as the first of a series for each of them. And I think, until now as Karachi La Jamia, we've really been about that site-specific moment in time of doing courses and workshops in the city itself, but now we really are interested in thinking about how that material, what is learned, what is shared in those spaces can circulate wider, and again, of course, like across different audiences. So I think we definitely are continuing with that. We already have a sense with the children's books of the ones that we're doing next. We want to focus very specifically on a river in Karachi called the Mani River. And the Mani River is right now, it's a seasonal river, it's the river around which Karachi really emerges. Um, and it is now under threat by the Malir Expressway. And so we want to focus on the kind of folklore and historiography, indigenous historiography of that river, and share that as well. So yeah, so we do have plans, and we definitely want to keep moving with it. And I think, like that question that you asked, it's so interesting about, other people doing that work. And um, yeah, it's interesting how communities emerge around specific political moments or ideas as well. And so it really does feel like right now in Karachi, it is like a fruitful time where a lot of our other kind of artists and writers and thinkers in our community are also thinking about similar things, like wanting to think about ecological knowledge. And yeah, so it is a really interesting time to be having these conversations.
And yes, just to add a little bit to what Zara said, I think with the children's activity booklet that we made for the Khoj exhibition, um, I think it was really good for us to do that project, because it also reminded me and Zara that we don't need, of course we're dealing with really serious, really violent things, but we don't need to be so serious all the time. That there are joyful ways in which we can think about this world, joyful ways of sharing, that really kind of help, young children connect, feel the love for our landscape, for the fish, to remind people about, the sacred presences of saints, of other beings. And so, I feel like working with children is something that me and Zara are both really, really excited about. It really feels like something important that we're both being drawn towards.
Questions from everybody here? I'm hoping that all of you have seen the exhibition downstairs and can actually relate to some of the conversation that's happening here. Alice has a question.
I've just I've just been in hello. I've just been in Malaysia, and I've been in Borneo. Sorry, sorry. Hello. Okay. My name is Alice, and I've just been on a British Council delegation to Malaysia, and we went to Borneo, and there was a big resistance project there to the dams, and I just wondered, it'd be really interesting to hear, because you did mention in Pakistan that you've been in contact with some of the resistance against the dams. In Borneo, what happened is they flooded the indigenous land, and the indigenous people lost their land rights as the dams flooded their actual lands. And of course, with climate change and our cities growing, we will need more water supplies. So there's going to be more threats of indigenous land being flooded. It'd be interesting to know if that's the case in India, but certainly it's happened in Malaysia, and the people that I met actually won a court case to prove that they actually had those indigenous land. But it's an ongoing struggle for them. They're still members of their community are being offered a very tiny bit of compensation to give up land rights. So it's a big struggle in Malaysia, and I just wondered if it's the same thing happening in Karachi and in Pakistan.
Were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, I think we got it. Yeah, I think specifically in the province of Sindh, I anti-dam resistance has been, yeah, really just. I mean, people say locally that Sindhi politics is structured around two main struggles, and one is for water and the other is for language. And so also these struggles over ecology and over water and over against dams are also so entangled with other ways in which the state is extractive or is yeah in antagonism with certain communities. But yeah, I mean, one really major dam issue that has been coming up for decades now in Pakistan is that the state keeps threatening to build a dam called the Kalabagh Dam. And Sindhis have been very actively agitating against the building of that dam, and it's been held off so far. But anytime the publics need to be distracted from something else going on, the state will bring up this dam thing. I mean, we also had this dam fund. So yeah, the image of the dam is very much central to Pakistan's infrastructural nationalism, the idea that dams are central to development, the idea that the communities that oppose dams are fundamentally backward communities against development. So yeah, I think it is it's a big one. Shahana, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just I guess not. I guess Zara's responding to your question, but just thinking about land rights just reminds me also that like working with communities in the Delta or even fisherfolk communities in Karachi, they are always reminding us of the futility of property land, right? That ultimately this was all people centuries ago coming and drawing lines where lines never existed, that these are fluid moving landscapes. So the flood that we now see as this like really scary, horrible, destructive force, life was always structured for the give and take of land. And you know, we've met with folks who've explained to us who remember that when they were young fisherfolk or even farmers living around the river Indus, that their grandparents, when the river was flooding, would be happy and they would travel long distances to the riverbank to see this flooding, and that there was a knowing that even if this river is going to flood and take over our land, it's okay. It will always give back to us more fertile land in a year or 2 years or 3 years, right? That there was this kind of the things were never so fixed, and I feel with property, land, and this desire to fix the landscape, to harden, to reclaim our coastal cities, a lot of the problem also lies there.
Other questions? Come on, Pradeep.
Hello. It's not a question, but it's just like I'm thinking about, like as like the sir has talked about, like starting with the fertile, the humid relation, fertile relation, and then like the discussion of came of a cloud, like from Jitendra Singh to my correct, yeah, and then the word comes of Nabam, where the desert like brings like its unmeasurable thirst, and the water when it exceeds, it drowns. So at that point, like, can we think an artist's role in today's context is the Jitendra's Saint Gupta's cloud, like the Cherrapunji cloud, who is bringing the humidity, like the humid relations, into the context. So the birds, like from Bharat, like wildlife sanctuary, like who has to cross the desert, can come to the sanctuary. Yeah. Can it be? Yeah.
Are there any other questions, or should I answer that first? Okay. Thank you for that question. I have a microphone. Thank you for that question. I think it's a very fertile question. And First of all, I want to acknowledge that Seal Rishte is something that I am invoking from Karachi La Jamia, right? So it's, again, one of the things that we as artists and people gathered around art can do is that the concepts that we offer each other, like the concept that they have offered, is something that we can now take and run with. That's one thing that art does. It offers us something that we didn't think about before, like they have, and then we use that to think about our own realities. In that sense, you're right. The cloud can be, and nowadays we all connect to something called a cloud, can be a hovering presence of ideas, concepts, images that we draw on and that floats and that can create conditions of fertility wherever we are able to harvest it, right? The idea of the cloud as a messenger is a very old one. If you read Meghadutam by Kalidasa, the Meghadoot is a cloud messenger, right? So the idea that in that instance there is a yaksha in a forest, he's separated from the woman he loves and he's thinking about her and he asks a passing rain cloud, can you go and tell her I'm okay? And right, that I long for her, I pine for her, but I'm still thinking about her. So that function of artists creating conditions by which ideas, concepts, images travel into unexpected locations, exactly like what has happened here. They offered us Hamare Seal Rishte. I caught that ball, threw it at you. You've now thrown it back to me. This is a function that art does play. And I hope that that's the kind of enlargement of the conversational context of art making, art viewing that places like Khoj enable, that we can develop in the future. Doesn't always happen in the places that art gets shown, but it does happen here, and let's mark that fact.
If there are any other questions?
Swan. Just, it's not very artistic question, just curiosity actually. So you talked about how things are connected. It's not one place. True. So if you look at folk culture, which is actually very, very local, but it's got the wisdom of, it kind of acknowledges that it's planetary. Okay. But when so in my daily work, when I work, when this whole business of climate change comes up, people who have to manage, they have to go absolutely local, because this subdivision now has become such that this subdivision is different from the next subdivision. There's no question, but just how do you reconcile?
The advantage of living on a spherical planet is that every location is the center of the world, right? So because of the longitude, latitude grid system. So whichever local we are talking about can, for that moment, assume and claim worldwide centrality. So let's say the islands in the Pacific Ocean that are going to be threatened with disappearance, if the rise of sea levels is just a little bit, may not affect other places, but they will affect them much more. They can claim a global centrality through their very local understanding of what is happening to the coral reefs, to the water bodies just around their maybe even 30, 40-mile radius. The other thing that I think about a little bit, I've been reading a lot of Amitav Ghosh, and it's good that he's alerted us to many of these questions, but in that nutmeg's curse, there is a tendency towards thinking about, oh, the wisdom of the indigenous peoples will save us. I don't think it will. Because if you look at nanoplastics in the ocean, no indigenous culture in the entire planet has the historical experience to be able to understand what nanoplastics in the ocean and our bloodstream means. Not even the most cutting-edge scientists have. This is new thinking, new information. So it can't be, I mean, indigenous cultures can teach us something about an attitude of respect and responsiveness. But they can't help, I mean, those who say that they're going to help solve our problems, that's not the case. And I think that persisting with that attitude that there can be local solutions to global problems is actually part of the problem. So there may be, like you have always pointed out, that the negotiations in the global climate change conferences are ultimately about always a few degrees that are neither here nor there. This has been the body of your work, Pradeep. And I think that it is interesting for us to be able to understand that we're living at a time where the experts are talking about non-issues actually, right? And that there has to be a kind of relationship between very local situations and much larger problems. It's interesting that you talked about anti-dam protests. The first anti-dam protest in the world was in India, near Pune. It's called the Mulshi Satyagraha. And it didn't work. The Mulshi Dam got built, has been built. This was in 1924. There have been subsequent anti-dam movements. The Damodar Valley River Corporation's primary dissident was a dam engineer, right? Who realized that the consequences of dam building were not going to solve water and electricity problems, and were going to create the problems. In Pakistan, you're still in a situation where there are communities still organizing to resist dams. There are no anti-dam protest movements in India any longer. There's one in Arunachal Pradesh and one in Uttarakhand. Feeble. But that's because through the decade of the 90s and the early 2000s, the biggest anti-dam protest movement in the world, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, was crushed both by police and repressive forces, but also by the successive judgments of the Supreme Court. So that created a climate where nowadays nobody talks about anti-dam movements in India. Luckily, you still do.
A quick follow-up. Thanks. It's actually from a very broader perspective, but do you believe that, for the longest time, there's been a big debate about art and science being two different disciplines, and they probably never meet anywhere. But do you believe we're now living sort of in an era or a zone where art and science are converging more than ever before? And what is the reason for that? The other part of it is that, discussions about climate change and the environment, they change every day. You got new reports, new findings pretty much every day. How does that impact the work of an artist, who's focusing on science or who's focusing on climate change?
Maybe they should answer this first.
Would you like to answer that?
Sorry, could the last part of the question be repeated? I missed a little
No,
bit.
I was saying that conversations about climate change, for example, or science and the environment, they change constantly, like on a daily basis, right? I mean, basis of reports or findings. How does that impact your work? What kind of an impact does it have? Because an artistic process is obviously very complicated. It follows a certain structure. So when you get new information, when you get new inputs or an outlook, how does that change your work?
If at all.
Shana, do you want to take that one? No. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the way in which we think about art and science as separate disciplines is not something we should necessarily take as a given. I don't think they necessarily. I think that these disciplinary categories are also, yeah, they're socially produced, and so I think, yeah, I think that because our work, we see what we're doing in Karachi La Jamia as very interdisciplinary. We work across different communities, and so I think that in the ways in which we interface with what's traditionally considered science would be that we would work with people who have that kind of expertise, and wouldn't claim to have that kind of expertise ourselves. In the same ways, we think that a lot of what we learn from indigenous communities as well is the communities that we work with as well is scientific knowledge as well. So I think like a lot of the work that we're doing in Karachi La Jamia is we're really in the process of rethinking so I think in that process, it can be a little bit unruly and chaotic and not always very coherent and very scientific. But I think that's part of the process for us as well. So I don't know if that answers the question. I think maybe it's just my own difficulty to step into the framework of your question, which is also cool.
You can update your artwork.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've always maintained in Raqs that an artist's work is never done. It's never finished. Every work or every process is just continuing conversation, and often because of the fact that the circumstances change and our understanding or awareness of the circumstances change. I can say that in our own work, there's been a much greater increasing cumulative awareness of environmental questions and the ecology over the last 10, 15 years. It began, I can mark the time that it began. We made a film which was like a detective film and a ghost story about a woman called Rosa Luxemburg. And within that film, we discovered that she had this incredible curiosity about, although this being a committed political revolutionary, she had an incredible curiosity about plants and animals, and she kept these detailed observations about an herbarium. So we were struck by that fact, and gradually our curiosity, aided and goaded by people like Pradeep Saha in the audience, with whom we have a long working relationship, who used to always tell us, do you think about where your shit goes, or do you think about what happens to your water, or all these questions. And these questions persisted in our minds, and I think that it takes time for artists to process, and also being in the presence of exhibitions like 48 Degrees that Khoj did, that being a witness to things sometimes takes its own, allows its own duration. And now I find that we're working on water, on the growth of trees, on insects, on the life cycle of a mayfly, on endangered species and their relationship to a timeline, not because we've suddenly become ecologically sensitive, but because an understanding of time and what time does to life, which is, let's say, goes back to the second law of thermodynamics. Energy has a way to dissipate, and if everything in life is moving towards some form of energetic dissipation, then you have to think about everything from the life cycle of a mayfly to menstrual cycles to the relationship between the fact, and we've done a lot of work on tears increasingly. We're thinking about eyes and tears. And that has to do with the fact that there is an emotion now present, which, and I've seen this especially in younger people, where they feel sad about the state of the world. It does, I've seen Monica's daughter being moved to tears by what is happening to the air. This is a feeling and an emotion that is quite, it wasn't part of my growing up, but I see it now amongst younger people. So if there is a relationship between their understanding and awareness of the planet, their emotional states, and the fact that human beings are the only animals that cry, that have tears because of emotional responses. Other animals also cry, but not because they feel sad or happy. Human beings do. And there's something to do with salinity, with the salt in the water, the sea, the hydrological cycle that actually connects you as a water-bearing body. We are large sacks of water, and let's say the waters and the water vapors in the planet. This is a growing understanding. It's going to take me the rest of my life to understand some of this, and it will work its way into some of the work.
Well, it's a pity we didn't have Atul Bhalla with us. He fell sick. There seems to be COVID floating around, so really sorry about that. For those of you who would have liked to have heard him, he would have added another layer of richness to this conversation. But I think on behalf of Khoj, I'd like to thank you all for being here.
Had a quick question.
Oh, was there?
No, not really.
I'd like to thank you all and to say that we're going to open the bar and we're going to set this place up for 3 games. So for everybody who'd like to see the exhibition, come up, play the games. One of them is about migratory birds and how they fly or don't fly to where they do. So for say. One is, of course, as she said, our audiences.
The Sabah game is about how a bill becomes
Law.
These days, we're all thinking about it very seriously in India, in Delhi and in India. So I think just whoever would like to be part of this, please feel free to come in. We can.
Thank you so much, and I think we can just like sort of.
Where is the bill?
Um, where is the?
Bill?
Yeah, so we'll serve at the counter, but you can just like say hello to each other in the meanwhile while we start service, and then we'll set up the place for game night as well. So hang in there, and
And on
we'll
behalf
get.
of Coach, thank you
Thank you.
for being part of this. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is that, given our long-standing commitment to working with Pakistan since '97, that Coach has had, that we are now reduced to doing this, but at least we're doing this. So thank you for
We
taking
wish you were here.
And I really wish you guys were here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Shuddha.